Hey there, I'm Sara Porritt, and you are tuning in to the Hear Us Roar podcast. Join me for inspired conversations with Asian women, chatting about how ideas and passions can ignite truly transformative journeys. On today's episode, you'll learn why Sara Larson Levey decided to reinvent the traditional yoga studio model by creating Y7. Transparently, I almost didn't release this episode of the podcast because it was one of my first forays into doing a virtual interview session, and my face was just way too close to the mic. Despite some of the sound quality issues, though, I knew that chatting with Sara was a once-in-a-lifetime deal, and I didn't want to rob you of the opportunity to dive into her story. So here we are. Ironically, Sara and I actually discussed growing up with unrealistic expectations for achievement.
When I was a kid growing up, if I came home with a 95, it was what happened to the rest?
And it reminded me that perfection shouldn't stand in the way of progress. As an onlooker who is also an avid yogi, what I can see of Sara's life can only be described as picturesque. At the time of our chat, she's a glowing young mom-to-be with a business that was named one of Inc. magazine's fastest-growing private companies in 2018. The reality is that in building her empire, Sara didn't always have the answers, but she partnered with people who did, including her hubby Mason, allowing her to flow as her business flourished. Let's start from the beginning with what it felt like for Sara to grow up as a biracial youngster living in Michigan.
It's weird because it was either you were full, I was probably one of the only mixed kids I knew. Whether that was mixed, black and white or any sort of mix at all, I was the only one that I knew. Everyone was always just one thing. So it was a weird, I didn't really know who I was. Everyone was just Asian, white, black, Indian, whatever. Just the one thing. And then there was me.
And because your mom's Asian, did your mom meet your dad in Michigan as well? How did they meet?
Yeah, so my mom was doing an exchange program through the University of Detroit and was supposed to be here in the States for, I think, 2 years. And she met my dad and didn't go back. That was it. So she's been here since she was 19. And she's always worked. She always had a full-time job. She didn't take any time off when we were kids. And just the nature of her job, because she's bilingual, she was placed in so my mom currently works for Chrysler Fiat, but she was at Ford Motor Company for 25 years. And she does product placement and planning for emerging markets, and her job has always been kind of based in the market research field. And Asian countries are, a big developing market for them. So since she is bilingual, her schedule was always a little funky. Michigan's an East Coast time, so she'd still have to be at work by 8, but she'd be taking conference calls from the house at 9 p.m. because that was 9 a.m. overseas.
Right.
So it was kind of she always really worked. So I didn't have other than, some Asian dishes occasionally that my dad learned how to make from my mom's mom. That was really it. So I didn't have a lot of, cultural influence growing up. So I didn't really resonate with that, even though I looked different.
And was that really confusing for you? Did you feel a closeness with the Asian side, or was it just something that belonged to you, but you didn't quite connect with?
I didn't really connect with it growing up, to be honest. I didn't really feel a difference until one day. I think it was fifth grade or no, it must have been fourth grade. It was somewhere in elementary school, later elementary school. A new girl had come up to me and pushed my eyes back and made them the outer edges of my eyes back and said to me, "You should look more like this."
Oh, wow.
And that's when I was what in the fuck?
Did you understand what she was trying to do?
Not until literally 10 minutes after. I was what just happened? And I was upset, but not I didn't process it really until late. I don't remember getting really upset until later that day. And I couldn't say why. I remember being I'm not embarrassed that I'm half Japanese, But it was just like the feeling of being told I had to look like something because I was.
Mm-hmm. And did you have a conversation with your mom or dad about that? Or is that something that you just kind of sat with?
I just kind of sat with it. My mom is not an emotional, cuddly sharer. And when I was growing up, a little bit more standoffish, very, let's call it formal and polite. And my dad was, he was my dad. Like, I don't know. I don't think I had that emotional outlet when I was a kid because I didn't have that. I just didn't have that closeness with my mom growing up because she was so formal and routine driven. That's how she was raised. And my dad was one of 9 and the second oldest and came from a family of, 8 brothers and 1 sister. And I don't know if he knew how to talk to an emotional bundle of me. And it's since changed as I've learned how to be more emotionally available and expressive. Obviously things are different, but I was I don't know, I was 9.
And have you accepted your Asianness? Do you feel more of a connection with it now?
Oh, 100%. Yes, absolutely now. I actually lived overseas for a couple years. My mom got a job transfer and that kind of really shifted my perspective. And I've always been really proud since then that I have that piece of culture and I do have that diversity in my background and I have something else to pull from and learnings to pull from and teachings from a different culture that I can kind of access and feel connected with. And I think that's when it kind of really shifted for me that it's an important part of my life and who I am and my identity and how I was raised and understanding, kind of the morals and the work ethic and everything that were taught to me as a kid. I have a way better understanding now.
Oh, I'm sure that changed your life forever just to be there in person and be immersed in it.
Absolutely.
It sounds like you actually didn't start off doing yoga when you got out of college. You started in fashion, but I am very curious what your connection with yoga was like prior to starting Y7. When were you introduced to yoga and when did you know that this was something that you wanted to potentially pursue professionally?
So my mom actually introduced me to it I was probably in high school, but I never felt a big connection with the physical practice of it. As you're kind of entering the yoga world, a lot of the times, your first kind of introduction to yoga as a whole is the physical practice. And it's so much more than that. And I didn't really resonate with that at first. I just didn't get it. But I love the idea. I was raised kind of with a mix of Eastern and Western practices. So I really do value this mind-body connection and this spiritualness without having kind of a single entity thing, more sort of an appreciation for how you treat people. There's 8 different limbs of yoga and, a lot of them have to do with how you react emotionally and how you relate to things you can or can't control and how you treat other people and situations around you. So I really love that part. I couldn't connect with it. I couldn't find a place where I could get everything I wanted, and especially out of a physical practice. I think sometimes I would go to a class and it would be really great and I'd get this really great workout and then I'd go and then it would just be I was covered in a blanket and I was I don't understand what's going on. And, I wanted somewhere that the Dharma felt really accessible and that I could relate to it, and it wasn't too far out there because at this point I hadn't done my training. I hadn't studied, yoga at all. As I graduated college and got into the workforce, and I actually pinched my sciatic nerve back in 2012, the end of 2012. And that's kind of what got me restarted exploring the physical practice, because that was kind of only the only yoga was the only physical activity I could do to kind of get my body back to an even keel. So I started trying a bunch of studios around the city and was feeling the same way about I want something accessible. I want something where I can kind of do my own thing if I need to. And I wanted it to be fun. I didn't want it to be so serious. And so Y7 is really just a compilation of the experience that I was craving and everything that I wanted that I wasn't able to get in one place.
That totally makes sense. And I feel like people who are yogis that I've met, at least, have been pretty particular about which studios are their favorite. And it's usually the one that feels right to them.
Right. There's no right or wrong, I think. This is just like one aspect of yoga. And it's interesting when people give so critical of Y7. And I actually look at it as a real gateway to yoga as a whole, because it is accessible to the person who maybe wouldn't feel comfortable going into, an Ashtanga class or a Bikram class where all of a sudden it's really intense and you have to master certain things before you can move on, at least with Ashtanga. And there's so many different types of yoga, and Y7 really gets you comfortable with the idea of the practice. So there's a place for everyone. There's a studio for everybody, and it's not going to be the same. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing.
Nor should it be, because our bodies are all different, and what we're looking for from our practice is different as well. So how did this former fashion industry maven take a leap from a job that serviced the exterior to one that serviced the interior? Let's find out.
I worked full time for the first 2 years of Y7. I kept my job. So,
oh my gosh,
there was definitely there was a lot of fear. It was a lot of making sure I could pay people, making sure that I could pay my rent, I could live my life personally. And I never really looked at myself as anyone who would start a business or be an entrepreneur. Like, I liked my job. I liked going to work. I was fine. I wasn't one of those who's like, I hate my job. I have to start something. I can't do this anymore. I liked it. I loved who I worked with. Like, I still look back on like my, kind of past that part of my life is like, I had a great time. So I went to school at University of Wisconsin, and I have a bachelor's of science in consumer science, and my focus is retail wholesale marketing. So kind of a lot of like supply chain stuff. Retail wholesale being a lot of like production and procurement, and what that looks like was kind of my like deeper focus. A lot of spreadsheets, and what no one tells you about fashion is that's a lot of math, which I had no idea about. And I was like, great, I'm doing the thing that I don't really like. That was the one part that I was like, well, I don't like spreadsheets, but I liked it. It was really fun, and you get to connect with a lot of people, and I think that's what kind of kept me in it. That's what I definitely miss about it, is like getting to talk to like my buyers every day and all of that. But that's how I got into it. And it just, New York is such a great place for that. So I worked as a sales manager directly for a brand. And then I went on to be an account executive and then a brand manager at a multi-line showroom before I transitioned fully over to Y7 full time.
And how did you actually start building this idea of Y7? Because it was very organic in the beginning, right? You just gathered a bunch of people together and did yoga the way that you wanted to.
Yeah, I always give all that credit to my husband, because he is, when you think of like an entrepreneur, like it's him. He started probably over a dozen companies with ideas that like he's wanted. And I think he just got really sick of listening to me complain, because he's always liked yoga. He's been practicing since he was like 20. And he used to be one of those like 6 a.m. people 5 days a week. I was like, who are you? Get out of here. And we kind of wanted the same things. And he was like, well, this is easy. We can just make our own. I was like, what? I was like, that's so silly. What are you talking about? So it was really, between him and I, he's still my co-founder. He's really the serial entrepreneur. So he kind of logistically figured like everything out, like got us a space on Craigslist that we rented out when we were just doing pop-ups. We posted the ads for teachers on Craigslist. That's how we found our first teachers. We auditioned people like on the roof of our building. It was really cobbled together, but it was really fun.
Was it scary, this idea of having to work with your husband as a business partner, or were you excited about it?
I guess I really didn't think of it as a business then, to be honest. It was never meant to be like this full-blown thing that it's become. It was just a fun side project that we had. And that was it. And then when we started signing real leases, I think when we signed the lease for Flatiron in the very beginning of 2015, that's when I was like, oh, this is like a real thing. Mm-hmm. And we had been doing it for that point for like almost 2 years. And it didn't really feel real until that point, because then there's paperwork in your name. It's not just like a bank account, right? That was our first real lease because the Williamsburg studio at the time was a month-to-month basement space that like we just worked out a deal with the landlords because no one was going to take the space that, we took. So it was in the basement. And when we popped up within Monster Cycle, it was also very flexible in terms of, our lease. It was month to month. So it wasn't like a real, like our Flatiron lease was like a 7-year full lease. And I was like, oh, this is a lot harder than like an apartment.
That's a commitment. 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're still in the same building. We love our landlords. We extended our lease there. So we're there. So that's really like, and when that studio opened, probably like a month after that studio opened was when I left my full-time job. So in like end of March, 2015, because it was just like, there's all these things you don't think about that are like yours now. Like I never had to coordinate trash pickup, get those contracts in place and, do the full cleaning because in all our other spaces, it was kind of like, oh yeah, we take care of it. There's just a fee tacked onto your lease. And I was like, okay, cool.
And now you have to think about every little detail.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, this is taking up a lot more time than I thought.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the spark that led to, I think, the next phase of growth, which was, opening more.
And where did the name Y7 come from?
It's just really simple. It's just the Y stands for yoga and the 7 represents the 7 chakras.
Not the 7-year lease?
No, not the 7-year lease.
That makes sense. You were saying that at some point it became a thing, and it's definitely a thing. I mean, it's a very specific thing in my opinion because it's like a yoga party to me. And
yeah,
in a lot of places you've been quoted in saying that I made it like this. It all came about because you actually hated yoga in the way that it was being taught to you and offered to you in New York at that point in time in terms of what was available. I love Y7 because it's like it's bumping and it's dark and it's candlelit and it's just got this energy. And I feel like all of that's very intentional. Has it always been like that, or has it been a bit of an evolution in terms of figuring out exactly what you wanted Y7 to be?
So it's always been like that. That's, the one thing that's always remained the same. Our build outs have gotten nicer. Our trainings have gotten like more precise, but one thing that's always remained the same is the experience. And that's really something I wanted. When I was going into yoga classes, they were always these bright, beautifully lit spaces, mirrors, and just I was someone as I was entering, at the very beginning of my yoga journey, I was so insecure. Like I would be in chair pose staring at myself and I'd be like, oh my God, you look constipated. Like what is wrong with you? And there's just all these, I don't know, just these, it was just, the room was always filled with like beautiful women. And I was like, I don't want to stare at myself. And I couldn't get out of my own head because of all the visual distractions. And it was all based on how you look. It was all based on the teacher's demo who knows how long they've been practicing for, who has the perfect form. And I was like, well, fuck, help.
Mm-hmm.
And you're embarrassed to ask for help a little bit because everyone can see you. Everyone can see you struggling. And that's 100% like a me thing. That's not on any of the studios that I went to, but I couldn't get out of my own head. And so I wanted a place where I felt safe to kind of like look silly, where I didn't have to stare at myself in a mirror, where I could focus on my intention for the class and not have to worry about all of that other stuff. And so that's really why the room is kind of this dark, candlelit, mirrorless space. It's really to create this kind of sense of individualness, like you're there for you, but you still get this energy, like you said earlier, from the room and everyone in class. Like, everyone is struggling with you. At the end of class, when you're going through that kind of final push and you're holding boat pose, that everyone is struggling there with you.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't have to visually focus on it.
Right. I think it's so interesting that you're so focused on this individual experience. Yet at the same time, I feel like Y7 is such a tribe and a community. And even, your slogan, Tribe Called Sweat, it's very focused on that tribe mentality. Do you feel like having both of those things in play is something that makes Y7 so successful, is that people feel like they belong to a community.
100%. And I think it's important to look at the fact that by taking out this aspect of like, look to your left, look to your right, look at your neighbor. Like, I think for some people that works incredibly well. I don't do well with competition in environments like that, where I don't want people coming to be better than everybody else. I want our clients coming to take time for themselves because they're doing something good for themselves, because they have a reason for being there. And so I think, as much as we are focused on, be where you're at today, it's your body. If you want to lay here, that's fine. If you want to do extra push-ups during chaturanga, like, cool. But you're all having the same experience, just in your own way. So it creates this sense of community without the competition.
Totally. And your community is definitely growing, because after your first lease, now you have studios in New York, Chicago, and LA. And I feel like yoga is a space in the fitness industry or in the wellness industry that a lot of studios have had a lot of challenges expanding, and you've done such an amazing job. And I think people are so drawn to this community and this environment that you've created.
The one thing that definitely helped, and it was a choice I made early on, is that I don't teach. So while I can, I chose not to, because the studio is not really about me as a teacher and someone to learn from. It's, we've always been super focused on making sure that we're serving our clients and we're creating a space for them to come explore their practice. And I think that's been helpful, because obviously as, one person, you can't be everywhere. And it's really hard if you're, the face, the teacher, and everything, to be everywhere, because everyone expects you to teach at every location, and that can be really draining. So it's a choice I made early on, and, we have an incredible team, and, there's no need for me to teach. And, I wouldn't add anything that, I haven't learned from all of my teachers. So it's been really great to be able to expand in that way, because we have such an incredibly talented team.
And did you run into any challenges in the expansion process?
Oh, so many.
So many.
I'm not a traditional, I don't have like a business degree. So we never had a business plan or things like that. So it was really like, there was never like this really extensive, 5-year plan of, okay, here's what we're going to do this year. Here's what we're doing next year. Here's what we're doing the year after that. And we just kind of opened studios. And it came with, everything was kind of learn as you go. And that's where a lot of the challenges came in, was like, oh, well, you can't just build walls in spaces, and you can't just move the bathrooms. You need permits for that. And I was like, oh, okay. How do I do that? And there's architects that become involved, and there's mechanical engineering and plumbing that becomes involved, and schematics for that. And there's all of these regulations and rules when it comes to build outs, and there's so much stuff. And that's where I was like, oh, I have no idea what this is. And so that was definitely, for me personally, one of the most challenging things about expanding, was kind of juggling all of that, and the landlord relationship, what that looks like. So a lot of, back end stuff that people don't see.
I can appreciate Sara's style of troubleshooting. This almost carefree mentality of figuring things out as you go and seeing each new challenge as an opportunity for learning. A fitting analogy, actually, to the practice of yoga itself. As a soon-to-be mom, I wanted to know if Sara's already had to reprioritize her life to get in her new flow.
I think I'll figure it out as I go. And I tend to be the person that if I have a plan and it doesn't go the way I want, I get really oh my God, why I did so much work on this. Why didn't it work out the way I wanted to? And so I've kind of learned to take a back seat and be more adaptable to, the changing environment, and only kind of control what I can. And, and a lot of that is just kind of your reaction to stuff. And I don't know this person that I'm making yet. So we'll see who he is and, his needs, and I'll kind of go off of that. But I'm, very fortunate that I can do a lot of, what I do kind of remotely. So I have a rough plan in place with my team for, what that looks like, but just going to kind of go from there. And I think I've definitely started prioritizing like my physical and mental rest a little bit more. I've always traditionally kind of been just someone who goes and goes and goes until I get exhausted and then crash. Mm-hmm. And now I'm just much more mindful that like, my body is not just mine right now.
If you were to give yourself a thoughtful piece of advice, the beginning yoga practitioner, the Sara that's still trying to find her footing and her studio and her community of yogis, what might that be?
I would tell her to let go of the expectation of perfection, because that's what I wanted always. Like I thought that my yoga practice had to be perfect physically. Like I would get so frustrated if I couldn't do anything, or if I didn't get to do like a pose more than once in class. I was like, oh, I know I can do this. I need to do it again. Just I had this crazy expectation of things looking and being a certain way, and that's just not how it is. And it's almost a little more fun, I think, and beautiful to live in this sense of chaos and a little bit of uncertainty, because you can really live in that moment.
I think what I'm loving about our conversation right now is everything kind of just flows for you. Your approach to motherhood, your approach to problem solving. And I also feel like that's probably why Y7, in my opinion, has been so adaptable to consumer needs. So I know a lot of the stuff that you're working on that's next and new for Y7, and it'll probably change just given how things play out, is still somewhat under wraps.
Yes.
But is there anything that you can share about what's next for you and for the studio?
Yeah, I mean, we're moving in the digital direction, and it's going to be so much more than what we were ever able to offer in the physical studios. So get ready. I'm just really excited because, we've built this brand off of, this we flow hard mentality. And while that's definitely not going anywhere, recognizing that may not be something that you want every day and every second of the day. And how can we be the community to support you in all of your needs and, everything that you're looking for when you think of yoga. So we're just kind of excited to explore what that looks like.
And if folks want to find out more about you or about the studio, what should they do? Should they go on Instagram, website?
I would go on Instagram now. You can follow all things happening with the studio at Y7 Studio, the letter Y, the number 7. And if you want to follow me, I am Sara, SARAH_Ayako, AYAKO, which is my middle name.
I've been following your pregnancy stories, and you're very honest about how you're feeling. So I can attest, great Instagram to follow. And thank you for being so honest and awesome. And thank you for tuning into the Hear Us Roar podcast. If you connected with Sara's journey, please comment and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Also, pop over to www.hurpodcast.com so that you can stay up to date on all the latest episodes. It's a great way for us to keep in touch so that I can continue to encourage you to see your passions blossom. I'm your host, Sara Porritt, and until next time.